Welcome to Bad First Impression, the podcast about movies where we meet them. I'm your host, Devin Warner, and today my guest is the author of Masterpiece in Disarray, or it's a Masterpiece in Disarray. I want to make sure
there's an A in there.
I want to put the
Get it right.
there. Yes, we'll cut all that out. Welcome to Bad First, of a Masterpiece in Disarray. We're currently on a run of episodes where we have the guests pick something that they think has been unfairly maligned and given an unfair, bad first impression, to talk about it and defend about it. You're the first person I've had on one of these episodes who has basically written a book doing that prior to being on. I want to talk to you a little bit about, before we get into today's movie, about David Lynch's 1984 Dune adaptation. What about this movie compelled you to write something so exhaustive about it?
That's a good question, because it's like when I started writing it, my publisher hired me to write a book that was 115 pages long. Yeah. And the final book is 560 pages.
Yes, so I'm about 115 pages into it right now. It's weird.
Yeah. And then my initial thought when I got hired was, how am I going to write 115 pages? That's a lot. And I wound up cutting 115 pages from the book.
Just, I'm assuming at that point, because they're like, there's only so much paper in the fact. Like
they were literally like my first draft. This is just like for all y'all out there who are planning to write a book someday. 400 pages in Microsoft Word is not 400 pages of book. Like it's like 700 pages.
What was the Microsoft Word page count in there? I'm curious.
It was 400.
Oh, it was 400 that translated to the 500.
It 400 became 700, and my publisher was like, the spine is going to break.
Like the physical integrity of the book is not going to be there.
Yeah. So it was the best thing for the book, by the way, because I gutted like anything that reeked of like academia or like stuff you could look up on the internet. Like, there was a lot of stuff about deleted scenes, and I was just like, I don't need to list every deleted scene and all that stuff. It's like that's getting too academic. Like the book is, even though it's long, it's supposed to be really fun. And I mean, is that your experience?
I think so. It's got a very nice conversational tone to it. Like it really, a lot of it is just like very well curated interviews that are just kind of people talking, like surprisingly, who is the production designer is Bob Ringwood?
Costume designer.
Thank you.
He's the MVP.
He's just kind of like speaking. He's like, he's got a real like, who gives a fuck sort of attitude. Like, I don't know, man. I'll just say whatever at this point.
Yeah. Not like in a dick kind of a way, but
no.
But just
this is settled. No one's going to get mad at me saying anything about this at this point anymore.
Yeah. That's why, like, I have a friend, Charles de Lazarica, who did a lot of behind the scenes stuff for DVDs and stuff like he did all the Alien quadrilogy, which if you've ever seen those docs, like they're incredible. They're very frank, and his advice is like, if you're gonna write a book or do a documentary about a movie, either do it while it's being filmed or like years and years and years later. Yeah. Like you can't do a
5-year retrospective.
No. You have to wait till everybody's career's over. and they're just like, it doesn't matter, like nobody's going to really get hurt. And it's like, and people, were able to speak very frankly about the film, and the fact that it was, it as the title suggests, things didn't go right. And, I think that's what makes it interesting. It's like, and it's an unauthorized book. Yeah. Which means nobody was telling me, oh, you can't put that. Oh, you can't put that. Like that was entirely up to me. Like if somebody said, off the record, that was sacred. But like, other than that, it was fair game. And I talked to about 36 people from the movie.
Yeah. And I know that it has like some like fairly rare, like David Lynch talked to you himself about the production of the movie. And this is a difficult thing to get him to, like, negative or positive, speak about in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So I'm genuinely very excited to get to that section.
Yeah, that's at the very end.
Yes. I think Justify, there's a really clever little guide, like after the intro or something. It's like, I know this is a very long book. Here are three ways you can read it. And it's basically like, do you have ADHD and you just need the good stuff? Go to this section, this section. Are you, slightly more well-adjusted? Here, go ahead and do this. Or are you a crazy person like me?
Front to back.
Yes, front to back. Yeah. But it's a very fun read so far. And Dune is kind of it's coming out at a fortuitous time because of the Villeneuve adaptations right now. Do you think those movies' existence and kind of prominence in current popular culture has done anything to hurt or to help the Lynch movies' reputation?
Oh, I think it's all been good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's fantastic because, and I didn't really know how I felt until I saw Dune Part 2 because I don't really think Part 1 is a complete movie. Like
Not really, no.
you really need to watch both to.
I think very intentionally too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And like, and that's fine. But like, yeah, like I saw Dune Part 2 and I really loved it. And I thought it was even better than Part 1. And I thought the coolest thing that Villeneuve did is he made a like 180-degree different movie than David Lynch did.
I think it's the only way to go too.
Yeah.
You know, because otherwise it's literally pointless. Because then it's like, well, we had the Lynch movie.
We have the Lynch movie, and and so it becomes a study of contrasts. You know, it's like the Lynch movie. Well, the Villeneuve, the thing I like about the Villeneuve movie is it stays very true to the themes of the book.
Yes.
In some senses, it carries through those themes even better than the book. You know, especially with the character of Chani and the changes they make to her. But like, yeah,
definitely.
But like, you know, in terms of Lynch's movie, like, you know, like Villeneuve made, I think, the most accessible version of the book for like a big mass audience, and Lynch really leaned into the weirdness because it's a weird book.
I think the Lynch movie, it's admittedly been a little while since I've seen it, but what I remember of it is I watched it very soon after I'd finished reading the book for the first time. And the biggest issue with that in terms of like being true to theme is that so much is compacted into the movie that like dealing with plot actually kind of just gets in the way of any theme actually really being addressed correctly or incorrectly.
Absolutely.
Was kind of my take on it.
Oh yeah, there's a great vintage interview with Lynch from I think '86 when he was promoting Blue Velvet, where he's talking to some talk show guy, and he's like, "Yeah, Dune is like a really nice Porsche car that's been compacted down, and it's still a Porsche, but it doesn't drive so well, and it doesn't look so good.
It's been like cubed, like yeah."
And I think that's actually one of the best sort of summarizings of what's wrong with.
Well, it's like you're like, oh, I can see the, you know, that was the windshield. You know, that's the no, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like what is still there is very Dune. It's very much the book.
Oh yeah, and the production design, the costuming, it all looks fantastic.
Yeah. And it's David's version. It's David's sort of, you know, it's shot through the prism of his imagination. And like, there were certainly, you know, major aspects of the book that he clearly wasn't interested in. Like, you know, the whole idea that Paul is space Hitler.
Yeah.
Which some people might argue is the point of the book. But like, I mean, I think, you know, but you just have to go in to David Lynch's Dune. You know, if you've only seen the Villeneuve one and you go into Lynch's one, you have to just understand, like, this is not a movie about, you know, being wary of charismatic leaders. This is a movie about a spiritual journey.
Okay.
Because that's the kind of filmmaker David Lynch is. And that's the through line that is in the book. Like, Paul does go on a spiritual journey. You know, a Carlos Castaneda-esque spiritual journey.
That's there. It's just kind of running parallel to, like you said, the themes that are more prominently, you know, in the Villeneuve adaptation. You kind of preempted my last question here. Is I was just going to ask, before we move on to today's film, because more visibility is being brought to the Lynch movie by the prominence of the Villeneuve adaptations, more people may be checking it out. What is a thing to keep in mind when, like, to basically make sure that you are open and have as much of a chance as enjoying the Lynch movie and meeting it where it's at as possible when you're watching it?
Well, I think, you know, and this does kind of dovetail into today's movie as well, is that, like, you know, you're going to realize two things. Number one, Villeneuve had a lot more tools to work with in terms of bringing the world of Arrakis to life than David Lynch did. David Lynch was very much limited by the technology of the time. You know, it was all opticals. There was no digital in the movie. You know, and that plays a big part in kind of how, like, you know, dated and clunky a lot of the stuff is. I mean, and when you read my book, you'll realize that like even back then, some of the effects were, pretty dodgy.
I remember the training simulator is maybe the thing that I remember sticking out as not aging best visually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of, like the blocky shields and all that stuff. Yeah. Like, but the thing that is impressive about it now is you watch it and you're like, wait, they put the equivalent of like $100+ million into this extremely weird fucking movie, like this insanely weird fucking movie. And like, yes, they did. And it just goes to show you like how much more homogenized our culture is now.
And yes, what we will let get to an audience. This is a very different type of publicly maligned movie. But last night I'd never seen Gigli, the famously
the Martin Brest,
the Martin Brest will never make a movie again movie. And it is, I talk about movies this way a lot, but these movies, for good and for bad, don't really exist anymore. Do you know how many people have the opportunity to say no to any given decision that ends up making it into a like distributed film? And that movie is literally nothing but moments that I'm like, someone should have said, this is not, whether or not this is not good, this is not acceptable. That's that entire movie. And I think,
I remember Joe Roth came to my film school once. Joe Roth was the head of the studio that made Gigli, and somebody asked him like, "What's the lesson you learned from Gigli?" He's like, "I will never give a director final cut again."
I was about to ask a follow-up question. I'm like, I can't do a Gigli.
We can't go down that Gigli road.
Gigli sidebar. Maybe we'll talk about Gigli.
No, but that does go to the point of like, that was that was part of the erosion, is like studios saying, no, we're not going to let directors have carte blanche or do ideas that are startling or shocking or, and like, that's why Dune is so amazing. It's because it's like, there's just so many like startling, audacious things in it.
It makes me really miss the big swings. And it makes me realize why when you have a director modern day who it kind of has set up a situation where they can do basically whatever they want. Christopher Nolan's probably the most prominent example right now. It's talked about like it's this weird mythic thing. And we realize like, oh no, even somebody like who had one or two successes and then largely had not done a ton of other stuff of note, like Martin Brest, could create a situation where he could just do whatever he wants. David Lynch, who had two, fairly moderate in the grand scheme of commercial filmmaking successes, could be granted something like this and be allowed to be as in control of it as he was up to a point.
Up to a point, yeah. Like that we talk about in the book, like how like it was about midway through production
where they're
like, wait a minute, we're not getting Star Wars here.
Someone comes to set and we're like, I don't see the teddy bears. I don't really get what's going on here.
Yeah. And they're like, we're making bed sheets for this movie, right? This movie's kind of weird and gross.
I've seen it was Kenner that did them, right?
No, the action figures?
Yeah,
there's a company called LJN.
Yes.
And they were actually much bigger than like the back then, like the Star Wars figures were like 3 and something inches.
Were they the same?
And
like
these were 5. These were like
5.
5. Yeah, and they were semi-articulated. They had like little battle-matic action or whatever. It's just crazy.
There's just a lot of people in like hoods, and so just kind of.
Yeah, no, but it's nuts. It's nuts that they so misread the room of who David Lynch was and what kind of filmmaker he was. I mean, like they saw Elephant Man, which is a fairly straightforward biopic.
It's actually a bit bizarre in the context of the rest of his filmography.
Sure.
When you think of what your average, 22-year-old film brat's conception of David Lynch is, The Elephant Man is maybe the one they haven't seen. It's definitely not the one they're first thinking of. Yeah. And it's actually funny. It's not even his go-to quote unquote normie movie anymore. Yeah. The cool one to like is The Straight Story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dune, the thing that's interesting about Dune is like it has just as much Eraserhead as it does Elephant Man in it.
Yeah.
It's like he really was trying to as you said, like make some big swings and bring a level of surrealism to the genre.
Yes. That surrealist is a good word for it because you're like, the kind of disbelief that this thing was allowed to exist while you're watching it is enhanced by, like you said, the kind of ineffable Lynchian tone that he couldn't make a movie without if he wanted to.
No.
I said there's a little bit in there where it says for a second he was going to make Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And I was like, I would be interested. I doubt it would be a good movie. Yeah. I doubt it would be a movie that he would talk about any more than he currently talks about Dune.
But that tells you how, because like Elephant Man and Eraserhead are such totally different movies. They could basically, read whatever they want into the tea leaves of this guy, and it's so like, he could do anything. And it's like, he could do Star Wars. He came this close to directing Return of the Jedi.
I know. It was more fleshed out in the book. That's like an anecdote that I've seen posted a million times. And the thing is like, George is described, I can't do a David Lynch because I kind of like gel into, it just sounds like Stephen King basically.
He said, I want to show you these things called Wookiees. And he showed me many things and many animals.
And I started getting this pulsing headache. So we are actually not here to talk about Dune. We're not. Well, we're a little bit. I originally pitched you because I knew the premise of the book. And I knew, so I said, if you'd like, it does fit the format of these episodes the way we're doing them. We could do Dune. And I assume because you have probably been talking Dune to death. We're like, I would rather focus an episode on something else.
Yeah.
So you throw.
Thank you.
Yes.
Not that I don't like talking about Dune. It's just it would be great that people know that I've seen more than one movie.
Yes. You threw out a couple ideas, and there was one that you kind of latched on to. It's a movie that I had heard of. Didn't really have a ton of awareness from after I watched it, and was like, I recognized basically one person in that movie. Was like, I still don't have very much context to like understand the background of this movie. So I'm glad that you have a pre-existing relationship to it. We're talking about Tobe Hooper's Light Bomb. It wasn't a successful movie, but it wasn't like a catastrophe to the best of my understanding, right?
No, it was a bomb.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, at least in terms of like how it did in America, I don't know what it did internationally, where it was a different cut. Different cuts, and I do want to talk about like the actual cut. I watched this on the America's favorite streaming service, Tubi. So I assume, and it was like just about 2 hours. Okay. So you watched the hour 56-minute version.
Yes,
that's the international version. You watched the good version, which is actually thankfully the more available version. The one that TriStar released in America is only 90 minutes, and it really sucks.
That sounds confusing because I think I didn't even actually say the name of the movie. Jeez. Tobe Hooper's box office bomb, Lifeforce.
Yes.
Based off Colin Wilson's novel, The Space Vampires.
Yes.
A title I heard and said, not only is that a better and more alluring title, it makes me understand what the movie is about a lot better.
Yes.
Looked up, Tobe Hooper said the exact same thing. He did about halfway through production. He's like, we should just call this thing The Space Vampires, right? I think more people might come hang out at this thing.
Everybody who worked on the movie says the same thing. They're like, this movie is The Space Vampires. Like it's Lifeforce was a title. I don't know if it was TriStar or Golan and Globus that wound up attaching that name.
I think it was the studio. Yeah.
Yeah. But like they they're like, oh no, we spent so much money on this. Like it should be more prestigious. It shouldn't sound like a Grindhouse movie. But it is. It's a Grindhouse movie writ large.
Yes. With a slightly different kind of like tone and set design to it. I'll say this about the runtime. You said it was an hour 56, like it was like right around 2 hours. The international one. I'll tell you what, even that version, I was like, I'm a little confused about some of the things that go on. It really does feel like there's some cuts, and I was looking and it said that Tobe Hooper's submitted version was like 2 hours and 12 minutes.
Yeah, 2 hours and 8, 2 hours and 12, something like that. Yeah.
So some extra change that basically explains, and we don't really, generally speaking, we don't really do a plot rundown here because we don't. Usually we just want to talk about other things.
This is a fun plot rundown.
we could
describing it would sound like a stenographer in hell.
It's very bizarre. So it opens. I guess we can do that. You know what's funny is we tried to do this a couple weeks ago when I covered The Master of Disguise.
Yeah.
And we ended up covering that movie via describing plot elements around a list of costume disguises he did throughout the movie.
Yeah.
There are no disguises in this, but there's
No.
plenty of fun creature effects.
Well, it's like you can kind of divide the movie up into chunks. It's like there's the first chunk, where it's a space movie, and
That's what I understand the most was cut from.
yeah, it does feel truncated even in the international version, and then it goes to Earth and it becomes more of like a supernatural suspense / psychosexual drama.
Yeah.
And then it turns into like an asylum horror movie. And then it turns in like not the asylum studio, like an actual literal
One
mental
that takes
asylum.
place in an asylum.
Yes. And then it becomes a apocalypse movie. And then it turns into almost a very straightforward gothic vampire movie.
Yes.
So it does a lot of what I call mode jerking.
Yes.
Which is something you see like in a lot of, more sophisticated filmographies. Like obviously like Stanley Kubrick loved to do it. Like
It never-
what's it, Danny Boyle. Like almost every Danny Boyle movie has at least one or two mode jerks where
it just changes like, we're not this movie anymore. We're a
Exactly.
different
Yeah.
movie now.
Like think about 28 Days Later. Like it starts as a zombie movie, then it becomes a military movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just having a conversation about 28 Days Later the other day. It's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
No, this movie never stops trying stuff. It just every couple of minutes, it's like, do you want me to do this? We can keep trying this.
Yeah.
And it throws out new ideas and almost has like, it's almost a full genre shift. It kind of never fully shies away from always having horror components to it.
Yeah.
But yes, as you said, like the different types of horror movies that it tries to be at different times, are often like a little incongruous with each other in a way that I had a little bit of whiplash with this movie, frankly. I don't know. How do you deal with that? Like, do you like that you're just like, it's just constantly holding your attention that way?
Oh yeah. And I know this is a very popular movie for people to like kind of snark on or like, Mystery Science Theater on, whatever, like to, be like, oh, look how stupid and crazy this movie is. And
Stupid's not for a movie this unfocused. No, truly.
Yeah.
Normally, unfocused and stupid are two things that go hand in hand.
Sure.
This movie, it never feels dumb. It does kind of always have that, I assume because it's got so many like old Tony Britts in it. It kind of never stops having that, authoritative tone.
No matter how many drugs Tobe Hooper was on when he made this, and he was on a lot of drugs.
Yes.
Let's be honest, but he was in full control of this movie. Like this is him at the peak of his powers as a filmmaker. Like this was his blank check movie, and we can get into that. We should get into that into like sort of the background of like where Tobe was.
This was right after Poltergeist.
That's right.
Then it was a 3-movie deal he had with the studio. That this was the first of 3, right?
Yeah. So for people who don't know, like Tobe Hooper is most famous for, one of his first movies, which was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a gigantic hit. Like really, sort of blew down the doors of what a genre movie was.
Yes.
But a lot of people mistake it for being like kind of a sleazy movie. And it's really not. Like if you watch it, it's not that graphic. Most of it is, implied. And it's not like some, people think of it as like this crazy handheld, whatever thing. It's not. It's mostly a classically shot, suspense movie. But yeah, it did extraordinarily well. And then, he did a few sort of more slightly bigger budget exploitation movies like The Funhouse and Eaten Alive. And then he did Salem's Lot, which was a very straightforward.
Is it a TV movie?
The 1970s miniseries version.
It's not the. No, I was say that's too old to be the Rob Lowe one. Yeah.
No. That was years later. No. Yeah. This one had James Mason. But and if you've seen Salem's Lot, the miniseries, it's like it's very straightforward storytelling. Like he's clearly knew how to tell a conventional kind of thing. There's nothing that crazy in particular about Salem's Lot. And then he got recruited by Steven Spielberg to do Poltergeist, and Poltergeist was an enormous success. And so on the strength of that, Cannon Films, who were these, infamous schlockmeisters, Menahem Golan and I forget what Globus's first name is, but Globus.
Yes.
So Golan and Globus. These guys were schlockmeisters, but they were sort of building this company, sort of on like junk bonds and like, sort of a pyramid scheme style sales tactics. And they wanted to move into bigger realms, bigger pictures. And Lifeforce was like the first like big budget movie they wanted to do. And so they signed Tobe Hooper to a 3-picture deal. And I think they thought they were getting the director of Poltergeist. What they didn't know is that Tobe Hooper had been fired off of 2 other movies, Venom and another one called The Dark. He either was fired, quit, or had a nervous breakdown, or all the above. And on Poltergeist, he was essentially hired to be like kind of a cover for Spielberg, who was ghost directing the movie.
Yeah, I think if you've seen Poltergeist, and if you've seen any other Steven Spielberg movie and any other Tobe Hooper movie, it's very obvious who actually directed most of Poltergeist.
Yeah, there are. I know Tobe Hooper's style, and I can tell you there is a lot of Tobe Hooper in Poltergeist. He absolutely had input. He absolutely, designed a lot of the shots and, or whatever. And there's a lot of his style in it. But yeah, I would say it was probably like, at minimum 60-40 Spielberg.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think because of their inexperience maybe, or maybe they just didn't, know the backstory. It's like, this is not, really like the hot ticket director. Like he definitely was a guy that had a lot of problems, and then and was not necessarily a good conventional blockbuster filmmaker.
Yeah.
So, and this was material that was brought to him. This wasn't like a pet project of his. Like they were originally going to have Michael Winner, who was a total scumbag British director, make it. He did a lot of the Charles Bronson movies for them.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they were going to have Michael Winner do it. But no, they brought it to Tobe, and he just made a meal out of it. And, and really like brought a lot of influence from like the Hammer movies, especially the Quatermass movies. Are you familiar with Quatermass?
I know of Quatermass. I don't think I've ever seen it. I did see one line online that basically implied that this is just only not in name a remake of one of the Quatermass movies.
Yeah. Actually, like it's kind of a combination of the first Quatermass and the third Quatermass. The first Quatermass movie, for people who don't know, Quatermass was like a like a astro scientist character who worked for the British space, organization, and by the way, like the idea that the British have like a space program is like kind of
it's very funny.
Well, most of the British space program, for people who don't know, is like it was mostly just launching satellites. They don't even have astronauts.
The temporality of this movie and the choice to give Britain like this like big major space program is really funny to me, because by my understanding, the book is like early 20th century. And the original pitch when writing the script was that this take place in the far future, so it would make sense for Britain to have an advanced space program.
Book was the far future, and Tobe decided to.
I have them backwards.
Yeah. Tobe decided to make it contemporary, and also to tie it to Halley's Comet, which was coming the next year. Yeah, which I remember seeing when I was a kid. I'm that old. But like so the Quatermass character. He's like the scientist, and he kind of gets involved in these sort of occult things, alien things. It was kind of a forerunner to Indiana Jones in a way. I know that Quatermass movies were also an influence on Indiana Jones, as well as John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
But the first Quatermass was about a astronaut who is like the last survivor of a failed mission, who gets infected with an alien. Something or other, and runs amok. And the one that is really inspired Lifeforce is Quatermass in the Pit. And Quatermass in the Pit is where they discover like buried alien spaceship in like the London Tube, and they open it up, and it spreads this sort of mind virus and causes basically an apocalyptic event in London. And all the scenes of mayhem in London are, you could almost cut from like Quatermass in the Pit to Lifeforce, and you wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot of movie.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on to it, and it has a bunch of different influences. And it's funny to think about the kind of fundamental disconnect between what Tobe Hooper wanted to get out of this versus what I'm trying to remember their names right now. Golem and Globus, thank you. Versus what they were trying to get out of it, which is, I think they were.
Wait, am I saying Golem? It's Golan.
I think it's Golan, and
I'm misconstruing the Jewish Golem and Golan.
A Golem with Golan.
Yeah, it's Golan and Globus.
Yes, I tripped you up there.
Yes.
They're kind of seeing this as their ticket to like legitimacy, you know. And he's like, I would like to take as much money as you'll give me, and I would like to have as much fun as you will let me have unsupervised, basically. And I think that's kind of reflected in, we were talking about the title earlier about how he's like, call it space vampires. I'm out here having fun, you know? And he's like, I have no illusions about escaping, you know, the grindhouse or being perceived a certain way. I just want to make the type of movies I had with the budgets that these people are now granting me.
Exactly. Yeah. And to their credit, they gave him the keys to the kingdom, and I don't think they ever really took the keys away. I mean, like, again, they had editing issues with the American release, but the international version is pretty close to his vision. Yeah. And I think, you know, like, yeah, to their credit, like, I mean, if you look at the output of Canon, you know, it was sort of like even a stop clock is right twice a day. You know, it's like they put out so much garbage, but they gave people, like certain filmmakers, so much freedom that like something really truly unique and insane like Lifeforce could come along and, you know, be this beautiful anomaly. Yes.
The movie that I kind of kept thinking of while I was watching it was The Keep. Which, by
the way, Nick Maley, who was the prosthetics guy on Lifeforce, was also the prosthetics guy on The Keep.
Okay, cool. So they're kind of, they're kind of like roughly in the same wheelhouse, but the biggest similarity I saw between the two of them is that you can tell they are you're being kind of like Rashomon. It's like you're watching Rashomon, but you're only getting one perspective the entire time. It's like they've just cut out the other perspective. And you're like, I can tell from like the competent way that this has been stitched together. This is all the good components of one like good half of a movie.
Yeah, there's definitely it feels like there's reels missing.
Yes. Yeah. Especially considering the opening with the British astronauts who are out there in the first place, and the main character, whose extremely memorable name is Colonel Tom Carlson, was up there with the British the British astronauts, but is the only survivor from that trip. And then stuff happens up there that is not actually revealed until later in the movie retrospectively. That was, I think, the most the confusing element for me. Okay. Is there's this later like flashback, and I almost wonder if that portion was just supposed to, like, he was supposed to give that debrief immediately after getting back from space, or if those are reshoots to cover for things that were cut out of the beginning section.
Yeah, I think I think all that space stuff was supposed to happen concurrently, and then they used a little bit of the flashback structure to integrate a little more of it. But yeah, like I think again, I don't know, because I've never seen the 2-hour 8-minute cut.
I've not seen any indication that it's like viewable.
Yeah, I know that Henry Mancini composed a lot of music for what was supposed to be an almost like silent, long, like 13-minute space sequence. And it was supposed to be almost like kind of balletic. But yeah, like that's the section that really, it feels truncated. There's a lot of fades and cuts and it's, but that stuff is really visually striking. It's really cool. Like they had these humongous sets.
The kind of crystalline pods that they exist in are like immediately, like it is one of those set design components that the second you see it on screen and it happens really early, you are kind of immediately locked into what's happening in the movie.
Yeah, no, it's super cool looking, and it's like, again, it's like, you know, I'm very familiar with like genre stuff, and it's like the most frustrating part of being a genre fan is a lot of the times you're watching a movie and they're only kind of hinting at what the like full-fledged big budget version of this could have been.
Yeah.
But this is, a crazy pulpy, B movie done at with an A level of production talent and money.
Yeah.
Which you almost never see.
The only other like example I can think of is was when M. Night Shyamalan made The Happening. And his like he said the quiet part out loud where he would go and do these press conferences, and this was kind of in a very
I was at one of those press conferences.
He was dealing with a lot of pressure in that moment. Yeah. And he would come out and say, he's like, I just made the most expensive B movie ever, is the way he described it. And almost by putting too fine a point on it, I think he invited people to attack it. It's like, well, this isn't even good as a B movie.
Yeah. I remember at the press conference in New York, somebody asked Zooey Deschanel, why was your character such a ditz? And absolutely sincere Zooey Deschanel, very concerned, said, she was supposed to be a doctor.
Is she? Wait.
Yeah, her character was supposed to be a doctor.
She's so sidelined in that movie.
Yeah.
I think there are things to like about that. I don't think it's like a total write-off.
Yeah.
But I don't remember that element of her character at all.
That brings up something I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Which is I personally think the weakest element of Lifeforce is Steve Railsback, who's the lead actor.
He's pretty uncompelling.
Yeah, I think the problem is with a story this crazy, you need an anchor. You need somebody who like clearly like this is a character who's supposed to start off being very level-headed and very sharp, on the ball astronaut who slowly loses his mind and becomes obsessed with this alien who's infected him with these powers and this this consciousness or whatever, and and it's supposed to be a deterioration. Whereas when you cast Steve Railsback, the guy who played Charles Manson, you cast Steve Railsback and you look at his character, and right from the beginning he's crazy as a soup sandwich.
Yes. It's kind of like this was always Stephen King's issue with The Shining is the second you see Nicholson on screen, he's like, well, you should never let that guy near any axes or children ever. Sure. And I agree. But in the novel, it is a slow descent into madness due to the ongoing factors in his life.
Yeah. The big difference being Jack Nicholson is a movie star and Steve Railsback is
pretty safe to say is not.
Yes.
I would not. I was looking over the credits of some of the people in the cast, and I was like, I'm very sorry, I don't know. I saw that he had played Charles Manson. I was like, yes.
This is what I know, and it's like I've never seen like who else was up for this role, but I can tell you Steve Railsback probably was not even in the top 20 when they first started making their lists.
He really does feel like they were just like Tobe Hooper, just like, sure, whatever, I don't care. That's like I'm having fun with my space movie. Yeah. Get someone to stand in, basically.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder if that was like actually the case where he's like, whatever, get me a doll, I don't care. I'm playing.
I mean, and to be clear, Steve Railsback is a good actor. He's really
just not in this movie.
Well, no, I think even in this movie, like he can sell all the scenes of his character being like unhinged and totally like off the reservation and just like, frantic and, manic and all this, all that stuff he sells.
Yeah.
But the parts where he's supposed to be a normal guy, no.
Yeah. There's the scene. It's that kind of like flashback structure scene where he's trying to explain, I'm trying to keep all the plot points in this movie. Like I can't keep them straight, but he's trying to explain what actually happened to all the others and how the vampire, who we actually haven't even discussed at all, and her kind of mind control powers were making him
the naked 18-year-old vampire.
Yes, she was 18 years old. This is the most naked I think I've seen a major character be for this much of like the percentage of the movie she's in, and then she's literally never not naked. I don't think there's even a moment where she's
never
like,
naked.
I'll put a cloak on, you know.
Yeah. She's an always nude. Yeah. And that was like the thing that blew, that really flipped my lid when I saw it when I was 12 years old or whatever. Like, so I read about it in an old Star log. That's what a nerd I was. I read old Star logs. Yeah. And I was like, what is this movie? And then I actively like waited for it to be on Cinemax at 3 a.m. or whatever and taped it. And then I'm like watching it and I'm like, oh my God, like this girl is beautiful and she's naked. And then like about 20 minutes later, I'm like, it's like being in a gynecologist's office.
It gets to, this is the rare movie that, because I know that feeling of like when you see, as a young boy, when you see boobs in a movie, it's just so, because everybody, usually most men have like kind of an activation movie where they saw their first pair and they wore out the videotape, going back over the scene, over the strip club scene in Beverly Hills Cop or something.
Yeah. That was me.
Yes, that was
five.
I was shown it way too young.
Do you think I'm a nasty girl?
Yes. That'd be the funniest thing to get DMCA'd over, singing Nasty Girl from the strip club sequence. Yeah, it does get to a point where you're desensitized to it. It weirdly stops being sexy, even though she's like a devastatingly attractive woman.
Sure.
You are just like, it creates an incredibly bizarre scenario where you're over the course of this movie, you get to a point where you're like, I get it. Towards nudity, a thing that you normally don't feel that way towards in a genre movie.
Right. And to have this much be in a mainstream big budget movie is crazy.
There are very few like mainstream movies that I would say contain that degree of. The only other one I can think of is Friday the 13th Part 2, which is basically just a softcore pornography movie. I think that's the one that doesn't even have the he doesn't have the hockey mask on yet.
He's got the bag over his
head. He's the baghead in that movie. But I think you see more nudity than baghead Jason like over the course of the
let's
movie.
be honest, like when I was 12 and I'm watching, I'm trying to find movies on whatever on cable, like I'm looking for boobs. I'm looking for nudity. Yeah. And like this movie gave me it was like making a wish on the monkey's paw.
Yes.
Yes. You gave me too much.
It is it is kind of one of those like lessons you learn very early on where it's like, oh, maybe candy for dinner isn't a good idea.
Right.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But that is what the movie feels like. It feels like a 12-year-old's idea of what a cool movie would be.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Like it's got to have spaceships and fucking vampires and fucking tits and explosions and there's going to be a bunch of zombies. It's just like there's an old Patton Oswalt joke about how all these like what we consider to be our like culturally important movies are directed by men and edited down by women. And he used what you might call a crude metaphor to describe it as like, well, men blast their film all over the place and then women come in and they structure the cells and they make the cells in both cases and they make sense of it. And they're like, this is a completed work that can go out into the world and exist on its own. And I do kind of feel like this is film that was blasted all over the place and is maybe in need of a attentive editor, let's say. Not necessarily that I think it needs more things taken out of. I think it maybe just needs a little bit of restructuring to it. Because I think that maybe there is, it's like I said before, there is potentially a coherent movie in here. I just don't think the one that exists is totally that for me. Well, but this was the first time you saw it?
This was the first time I had seen it.
Yeah. It's like I saw it for like the whatever, like who knows, 8th time or something. Yeah. And like, I'm watching it, and the thing that struck me is just like, this is almost like a conventional movie. Like in terms of the story, it's like, yeah, everything fits. Like nothing is unexplained. So like it's just it's like even the way she looks and the fact that they find 3 beautiful nude people in Crystal Sky.
There's also 2 male vampires who I believe are equally nude the entire movie.
They are, although they had to cover them more because of the censorship. Yeah, but like, like the fact that she's, looks the way she does. It's like they read his mind when he was on his way in, and they made themselves looked like his deepest sexual fantasy, which apparently is an 18-year-old barely legal French girl.
That feels like them just friends. Like, no, it's the character who has the fucked up taste in women. It's okay that we did this.
Yeah. By the way, that sequence where they find the bodies is hilarious because it's like he's just floating over her, clearly not looking at the guys. And like they even, when the guys are talking about it, they're only talking about her. They don't even mention that there's two other men.
It's funny because from their perspective, this is potentially first contact.
Yeah.
And their horniness in the moment is like, oh, there's two guys. I don't know. Who
Yeah.
cares? Whatever.
Yeah. The best and then that one female astronaut who just kind of gives the guy side eye.
She's like, and the two guys. It would have been fun to see her be that droolingly horny over one of the guys. I think I think that would have made that scene a lot more fun.
Yeah, the guys are kind of given short shrift in the movie in general. I know one of them was supposed to be played by Billy Idol, and then he couldn't.
One of the vampires.
One of the male vampires, and so instead they got Mick Jagger's brother. Is one of the vampires.
Cool. Basically the same.
Basically
couldn't tell them apart. I wanted to talk a little bit about the influence of writer Dan O'Bannon in this.
Yeah.
Because and I was shocked to see that they came out.
Speaking of cocaine.
Yeah. Speaking of. That guy did cocaine. They came out at basically the same time, and I didn't know that they came out in the same summer. This, and I believe his only directed feature is Return of the Living Dead. Mm-hmm. Certainly his first. I don't know if he's done anything since then.
No, he did a couple others. I think he did at least one more.
I don't think he did any of the other Return of the Living Dead.
Oh no, he didn't do any of those. No, but he did at least one other movie.
But that movie, I was watching. There's when the vampires drain the life force of someone. Mm-hmm. You're left with kind of like a almost Crypt Keeper-esque, just there's no muscle left on you. You're literally just skin over bones.
With the huge like anime eyes.
Yes. Yeah. And that, and especially the way it's animated, really reminded me of the female zombie torso that like explains the rules of how zombies work in the Return of the Living Dead franchise in the middle of that movie. Those animatronics looked shockingly similar. And so his involvement in the two movies had me wondering if, like, to the degree I was like, was this recycled like later in the summer? Did they like just reuse this later down the line?
You know what? I vaguely remember reading something like that like he might have even done the pass on the script just to get some help with the mechanical effects on his movie. but yeah, I don't know. But like I do know for a fact that speaking of rock stars, the music video for Duran Duran's Wild Boys has a really creepy puppet in it. It's like a head. It's like a kind of a robotic looking head, bald, and really creepy looking. And it's actually Patrick Stewart's prosthetic
from this
movie. And it's so disturbing looking in that video. So if you've never seen the Wild Boys video, which was directed by Russell Mulcahy, check that out. It will give you nightmares.
I do love the idea that the set of Lifeforce was just being raided by different people who are like, and there's like a half paying attention security who's like, I don't give a fuck. Who cares? They rapped on that scene, so I don't care, you know?
Kind of like the security guards in this movie, right? Like
I know.
The British space program like has like less security than an average JCPenney's.
Yes.
I think there's a naked girl running around the building, you know.
There is, I think maybe the thing that I have the hardest time wrapping my mind around in terms of like tonal shifts is, you said for a while this briefly becomes like an apocalypse movie, and it ends before it really ever addresses
a zombie apocalypse.
So I'm fine with that, but the rapidity with which it becomes clear that those are going to become the stakes. They become the stakes with a massive death toll. And then the movie is like, now we're just going to go back to space vampire thing. And I'm like, but we're underground from the church where there's a bunch of dead people laying around. And it feels like the movie is not like, this is not a movie that I think needs to be concerned with being sensitive to, issues of loss or death or anything like that.
No. But this movie is all about just like jacking your pleasure center up to like the maximum. Yes,
But it is, and I think that to that point, it is a bit dismissive of its need to address the things that have came before it in any given scene, if that makes sense. Where it's like, it's way more important that they have a weird romantic death scene. Kind of, not really. I think it's mostly because Railsback is not, I don't know. Do you like him in that scene where he stabs her by going through her
I mean,
gut?
he's himself. He's his frenzied, crazy looking self. I mean, yeah, like I think, he's fine. But again, like I think, somebody else, like I was actually thinking like, if you wanted to find like an actor who was charismatic at a price at that point, maybe somebody like Tim Matheson would have been a good choice. For that role. That would have been my, sort of fan casting. Like, but like, yeah, like, he would have sold like, okay, he's an affable, normal guy, straight arrow astronaut, who turns out to, have this inner fucked upness.
Yeah.
All this psychosexual stuff. And, which is really amped up in the scene where, he has to kiss Patrick Stewart. Where that becomes like a thing where he's like,
they just keep like flashing him in and out with the actress's name is Matilda May.
Yeah.
Where they're just like literally, it's like you see Patrick Stewart, Railsback, Matilda May, Railsback, Patrick Stewart. I was trying to keep my order of guys.
It is like a internal gay panic moment come to life.
Yeah, but it's you're right. You try to like apply, and I think maybe this is the lesson I'm going to take here from your like ideas on how to enjoy this, and tell me if I've read you incorrectly. The idea that like, oh, maybe that's a gay panic moment, but I'm like, I don't think the movie is thinking about that hard enough.
No.
For this to truly,
no,
it's I don't quite want to call this movie stupid because it has too serious a tone.
Right.
But that means
and it's played completely straight. It's not like it's not like a Robert Rodriguez movie where they're like, wink, look how stupid this is.
No, and it's I'll say this for it tonally, and this is one consistent thing, is it's just like we're just doing the thing that we're doing. We're not pointing at it. We're not acting like we're slightly embarrassed that we're doing it. We're just doing this thing. I do really miss that about watching movies prior to the 90s. There's a lot of 90 movies I like, but I feel like that kind of went away around then.
Yeah. And I can say that about Steve Railsback, even Steve Railsback, who I think is miscast, is 100% committed. Like he's not sleepwalking through this movie.
He's trying. He's not doing nothing.
Yeah. And William Finlay is fantastic as like the scientist character.
He's not the
he's the guy with the white hair. He's the guy who's like, she's totally alien.
Yes.
Totally dangerous.
No. I'm sorry. I was mixing him up with the like the higher up colonel.
The Peter Firth character.
Yes.
Yeah. No, like the Peter Firth character is just a cool, straight ahead, like cop kind of character. The William Finlay character is almost like the Quatermass component to the movie. And I love his delivery and everything. Apparently he was being inducted into some royal thing while he was making the movie, and he had to go meet the Queen. And apparently the Queen asked him what he was working on right now, and he's like, something respectable.
I really don't want to explain it to you because like I know you're trying to be polite.
Yeah,
I don't want to explain what Lifeforce is.
Yeah. As Eddie Izzard says, he did his impression of the Queen. Like, oh, you're a plumber. What on earth is that?
Lifeforce is a movie that sometimes these are movies that I've had like these guest choices. There's sometimes something I've had a relationship with. This is a case where I was like, oh, that's always just kind of been, like far down my list, like something I was aware of, but I didn't have any specific interest in. This is, I think, on your advice, something I'm going to revisit at the very least. I think how you're talking about how you can kind of be desensitized to Matilda May's boobs through just sheer overexposure throughout the duration of it. I think I similarly may be able to desensitize myself to the generic whiplash of like as you move through the different sections of the movie. Because you were saying you're like, I've watched it for, the 8th, 9th time, whatever. Oh, this makes sense. This is just a regular plotted movie to you. And I think it's just if you watch it enough times, you can get into the mode, which I think Tobe Hooper is wanting you to, which is like, stop asking questions about it. Just know the basic facts enough that you can just get to the next thing and enjoy it. And I will say, once I get out of the like, oh, it's weird that we just shifted from this type of movie to this type of movie. Once I'm there, I'm enjoying the apocalypse movie once I'm in it. It's just, it's almost because I'm enjoying being there that I then resent being moved into another movie a few minutes later. If that makes sense.
And I think the genius of Tobe Hooper, and he is like one of those directors I wouldn't hesitate to call, him a genius. Is that, like when he did Texas Chainsaw, their intention was, we want the audience to feel like the people making this movie are insane. And I think that carries over into Lifeforce.
Yes.
Except Lifeforce is exponentially grander, more ambitious.
It's not him like throwing people out of second story windows, although I'm sure that happened at some point in this movie as well. No. It's him having the resources to do things on the scale that kind of matches his ambition.
And to do something startling and audacious. Like I think the cinema of audacity has really just gone away, because like most films now, even the edgy ones, like even something like Deadpool and Wolverine, I'm sure has been screen tested to death and has been, played to audiences in Canoga Park, and they're like, oh, people didn't like that, like.
And that's the thing, is that movie, whose selling point is that it's dangerous and edgy, is actually one of the like safest, most sanitized projects you can probably have.
Sure.
Look forward to in a couple weeks when we are inexplicably doing an episode on Deadpool and Wolverine. I have a couple episodes where so sometimes we do follow-ups. Like there's a new Nick Cage movie coming out in a couple weeks. I have a previous guest who has watched every single Nick Cage movie. So we're going to catch the new ones as we can. Deadpool just has been a unfortunately consistent discussion topic in several episodes. So we're going to maybe come together and have a little bit of a brain rot sesh about that one.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is it's like, like even the edgiest movie you can think of coming out now doesn't even come close to being to feeling as like the wheels are coming off the train as this movie.
Nothing feels this dangerous. The closest I would say in terms of mainstream acceptance, like not because people are doing crazy shit on the fringes of film. That's kind of the magic of everybody has a phone now. Everybody can make movies in their backyard now. But in terms of mainstream acceptance, I think Yorgos Lanthimos is kind of the one guy who is doing weird shit and being given validation through, financial success and awards. And we're saying, good job, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Everybody else, I think, is kind of, you look at somebody like Christopher Nolan and you look at Oppenheimer, and that's very clearly a weird, not like focus tested movie. That's the movie he wanted to make. He's just lucky that, and this reminds me of I think it's an apocryphal David Lynch quote. He said to Steven Spielberg, he said, "Steven, you're so lucky. The things that you love, millions of people love. And the things that I love, thousands of people love."
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is that the things that come through and are audacious and get recognition are now just the ones made by people whose sensibilities align with the broadest possible taste.
Sure, yeah. Like people compare Christopher Nolan to Kubrick all the time, but it's like, how many superhero movies did Kubrick make?
I'm trying to think if you'd be like, I don't know. Is there does
Clockwork Orange is a superhero movie, right? No. But you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
Yeah, like his sellout movie was fucking Spartacus.
Yeah.
That would be the apex of Christopher Nolan's career.
Yes. And it's funny that it's kind of like, it's not Kubrick's worst movie. Lolita just doesn't work for me. I think if you're throwing out his early, like everything before, I think
Killing.
How did he feel about Killer's Kiss? I feel like he's like, it's okay. It is what it is.
I think he considered The Killing his first movie.
Yeah.
Or most people.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the funny thing about Spartacus, is it's like, second worst movie. I don't know. It's certainly not in his top 10, I guess. Yeah. Like safely not in there.
Yeah. And it's like, but like, I think you got to give Tobe credit because, you know, like this was his moment. Like he could have done anything. Yes. Like he had the blank check, and you know he cashed it on this. And
I feel like he has no regrets about that.
Oh no,
this is clearly not a movie that you're contrite about.
Oh yeah, this was this is kamikaze filmmaking. Basically,
that is a fantastic term that I'm going to steal. No. And I guess it's just that I really miss these huge kind of ill-advised swings. This is why I loved Babylon so much a couple years ago, where it's like, oh, I walked out of that and I'm like, you're telling me America didn't like that? I fucking loved it. But, you know, I think that's about all the time we have on Lifeforce.
Okay.
This has been so much fun. Obviously a masterpiece.
Are we drained of life?
Am I drained of? Honestly, no, I'm not. This was like frothy discussion. You know,
effervescent.
That's the thing, is that it is in theory about these kind of like big, hard themes, and then the movie just doesn't really address them. So you are not really exhausted or drained of your life force, as it were, by the end of a discussion about it.
Yeah. No, but this was great. Thank you.
This was so much fun. We end every episode talking about. I was so good at asking that question just now. My last discussion question that I throw out at the end of every episode is, if you were going to come back to defend another movie in a similar fashion, what movie would that be for you?
Well, I think we already talked about this. I want to do Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
A very unfairly maligned movie.
Yeah.
Often.
Which interestingly enough, I noticed the ending of Lifeforce kind of parallels the ending of Star Trek.
It is a little bit,
because it's like the guy and the girl and the alien girl, like they join together and they go up in a beam of light.
That's the thing I didn't really touch on. Lifeforce is kind of the original Portal in the Sky, Close the Portal, blockbuster
Sky
movie.
Beam, yeah.
So
that's
Suicide
true.
Squad really ripped a lot from Lifeforce.
It did, yeah. Also, that recent shitty Tom Cruise The Mummy movie is like, if you want to know what Lifeforce is like without boobs or any ingenuity or imagination, watch The Mummy.
That movie is so boring. It's like literally, I can't look at it sometimes. I'm so uncompelled by what's going on.
Yeah,
the motion picture, I would absolutely love to have an episode about the motion picture. I fucking love it.
STTMP, baby.
Yeah. A masterpiece in disarray is in bookstores now. Do you have anything else to plug, Max?
Do I have anything else to plug? Well, you can find me on many Blu-rays doing audio commentaries and special features. I work for Kino Lorber, Arrow, Viavision Imprint, and I have some cool ones that are out now. I did the 2 Fletch movies with Chevy Chase.
Yeah.
I did The Minus Man, which is a very underseen Owen Wilson vehicle that was directed by Hampton Fancher, the guy who wrote Blade Runner. And I did it with Hampton.
Oh, okay.
Which was really fun. And I am on the Viavision release of Dune, in which I do an audio commentary on the 3-hour-long Alan Smithy cut. The TV cut of the movie, which is, don't watch it. It's awful.
Okay.
if you want to watch a commentary, which is me saying for 3 hours, this movie is terrible, don't watch it.
That would make a terrible podcast. I'll sometimes listen to like riff track stuff as like a podcast.
Yeah. I'm like, this movie you're watching is awful. Here's why. So that's but please go grab the book. It's not. Even though it's really long, it's not a chore, I promise.
It's not. And it's a lot of, it's like you said, it's a lot of people being very candid. It's a lot of people who are, like you said, at a point ready to talk about something openly in a way that most people are not, about like things that were a fascinating failure a couple years. You're not going to get people talking about the Tom Cruise Mummy like this right now.
No. There's puddles of tea on the floor after you read my book.
Yes.
Puddles of tea.
And of course it contains some rare conversation with David Lynch about this movie. And with lots of other people, including John Dykstra, who I was going to read a passage, but I think we're out of time. But like, there is a point in the book where John Dykstra talks about Lifeforce and working on it. Yeah. Do you want to give us a passage real quick?
Sure.
Let's pull it up, and we'll. You know what? Normally we end the episode on a quote from the movie. I think in this case it would be more appropriate to end with a passage from the book.
Yes.
If we'd like to do that. So
yes, I'm lucky. I've gotten to talk with Patrick Stewart about this movie. Patrick Stewart really loved the fact that his first on-screen kiss was with Steve Railsback. And I got to talk to John Dykstra, the special effects guy, who started on Dune, quit Dune, and then went on to the glory of Lifeforce. He says that was hilarious. It was kind of the same, an indie film trying to do a big production. Tobe Hooper had grandiose ideas and a really limited budget. It was a B movie with a C budget. There was no producer on it, no line producer at the studio during production. Trying to do stuff in England was tough because I didn't have my team, people that I'm used to working with, and they didn't have the technology. Step motors and things like that I was used to, as a matter of course here, were not as readily available, and the interfaces between those numeric control systems and cameras weren't readily available. It was okay, but it was guerrilla visual effects, and it showed. They should have just called it Space Vampires, the way it was originally supposed to be. That was the name of the book. That was the movie we made. It was a vampire movie.
Yeah. And that's Steve Dykstra giving the...
John Dykstra.
John Dykstra. I was combining him with Railsback.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't do that to you again, Dykstra.
I'm sure he appreciates that.
This has been Bad First Impression. You can find us on all socials at BFI Pod, except for right now, TikTok has banned me with no warning, with a very ominous permanent ban. So we're working on that. But you can find us on all other socials.
Does that tick you off?
Yeah. I'm very glad you were so proud of that. You can find us on all other socials at BFI Pod for show clips, for news about what's coming. I think it is announced, but I don't believe this is the last episode before we have a coming miniseries. So I'm not going to go ahead and make that explicit now. If I should have, then I'll put a clip in later. You can find me on all socials at What If Devin. I'm mostly posting about the show or movies I go to. And that's about it. So until next time, see ya. Don't kiss Steve Railsback as your first.